So, Syslog, one of your favorite tools from a troubleshooting perspective, is by far one of the more important tools. This is going to allow you to be able to get access to all of that information on the events and notifications that are coming out of your infrastructure devices. So Syslog itself is a protocol, and it allows for the storing of event notifications either locally on the device itself or remotely on a dedicated event repository server. There's many different applications that can support Syslog. There's also practically every network device out there. Some individual services can produce Syslog messages. The bottom line is Syslog is by far one of the more useful tools from a network management and infrastructure management capacity. So what are the parts of a Syslog message? Syslog starts out with a timestamp. The timestamp is useful in determining when the actual event occurred. You also have a facility. The facility will tell you what part of the system is actually generating that particular alert. So if it's the authentication module, it'll say something like authentication module. You also have the ability to be able to determine severity. So severity is going to allow you to be able to see, is this an informational Syslog message, or is it something that's telling me of an immediate doom and gloom for the network? You also have a description, and this is going to go into the details of what it is that the actual event is telling you. So this is going to give you specific information. It may say something like, port 1.1 is down. That is the kind of information you'll get in the description. So let's dig it down into a little bit on the facility side. This is really that category of the message and the source. So there's different types of Syslog facilities. You've got kernel level messages, which are ones that are very low level, and usually, if you get a kernel level message, that's a pretty severe, facility to get a message from. You also have user level messages. You can get get information from the mail system daemons, as well as security and authorization Syslog facilities. And then, of course, you have the network level as well. All of these are some very typical ones out there that you will see leveraging for Syslog. So let's dive a little bit into severity. This is ultimately the level of importance of the message, and the listing goes from most severe to least. So a Syslog severity of 0 means you have an emergency situation. System is basically unusable, which the fact that you actually got a message is telling you at least something's working, but that's the level of severity that we're talking about here. The thing is broken. You also have an alert, which is telling you that action must be taken immediately, or everything's going to, have some serious issues, potentially going to go down. Level 2 is critical. This is a message that indicates conditions that should be corrected immediately. In the event of a situation where your fans stop working, for example, in your server, that would be a critical message because eventually your server is going to get very, very hot and stop working. The third severity is error. So the error message indicates a non-urgent failure. This could be something like, I'm getting an error on a disk. It's not telling you that everything is broken, but it's saying that you need to inspect it and figure out what's happening. Fourth severity level is warning. This is where you can look for messages that are going to indicate that an error is potentially going to happen if you don't take action. So it's giving you a warning that you're reaching a certain threshold or you're getting close to it to be able to hopefully preempt that from getting any worse. Severity 5 is notice. So notice messages are going to tell you when there's unusual activity, but it's not really an error condition. So in the situation of a notice, you may get something that says, hey, this particular interface is seeing, these types of this type of traffic, and it would send you a notice saying that it's above a particular threshold. Bottom line is these are ones that are going to just give you sort of a pulse, if you will, of the condition of your device. And 6 would be informational. These are just normal operational messages where you'd have a log to be able to identify, how the system's operating. So if it runs a cleanup script at the end of the day, you may get an informational message saying that the cleanup script is executing and the cleanup script executed. Those might be two different messages. And then last but not least is severity of 7, which is the debug severity. Now, the thing about debug is they're very useful for developers, but this is going to generate the most information possible. So what that means is you're going to be spending a lot of CPU and you're going to be spending some resources to be able to generate these messages. So if you are not using this for actually debugging a specific issue, you don't want to set Syslog to you don't want to set messages to a severity of 7 because that's going to be way too much information for normal usefulness. That's why you don't want to use it for tracking operations. Just use it for debugging. So let's dig into a little bit of a Syslog example. So here we've got a couple of different example Syslog messages. So this top one we're going to go ahead and deconstruct a bit. So the top part here is your date and time. Now notice you've got the month, the year, and you also have a time that's in UTC time. Why is it important to have a time zone? Because this can be a problem. If you've got different time zones at each one of your locations and you don't attribute for the fact that those time zones are going to have different clock times, then when you go to actually troubleshoot an issue that goes between facilities, you're going to be chasing your tail because you're not going to have a consistent time period. That's why using something like UTC, which is universal time, would allow you to be able to have a consistent time process across all your devices, regardless of where they are in the globe. The next one is the facility. So here's that component where we talked about before. This is the actual device itself and what's generating the message. So here I've got UCS Manager, I've got a log capacity issue. The next thing is a unique fault identifier, and this is something that you can use to be able to identify this particular message itself or this particular system. Bottom line is that's unique to this particular system so that you can find that log if you needed to. This is the severity codes. We talked before about the different levels. So informational would give us that particular severity code, so we know that this is just going to tell us what's going on with a particular system. So here's a mnemonic that's actually going to tell us, where what the actual message is generating here. So log capacity is telling me that that's the type of event that we're looking at here. This is telling me which particular chassis and which blade in a chassis system is actually generating the message, and then the actual description itself. So here we've got the details of what this particular message is. So log capacity on management controller on server 1/7 is very low. So that's saying that, hey, this isn't a critical error yet, but look, you're going to end up having some problems. Just understand we've got an issue with this log message, with the log capacity of this management controller. So hopefully that helps you to better understand how Syslog works. And as you can see, there's other examples of messages, underneath there. But the bottom line is all Syslog messages are going to be constructed in a very similar format. So at this point, we'll go ahead and move into a demonstration of configuring Syslog in UCS Director. So in this particular demonstration, I'm going to show you how to configure Syslog within UCS Director. So the first thing you have to do is you go to Administration, and then you go to Integration. And this is going to give us a list of some of the different items that we would have as far as integrating UCS Director into various external systems. So in this situation, we're going to go straight to Syslog, and we're going to click Enable Syslog Forwarding. At this point, it gives me the option to be able to, configure the severity of, what it is I want to be able to send to Syslog. So as we mentioned before, when we were talking about Syslog, debug is great for situations where you're actually trying to troubleshoot something. You need to be able to get more information from the system because you're trying to track something down. But debug is not something you want to have as just a general, characteristic of what you want the device to be able to spit out. It takes an enormous amount of resources, and it's also just a ton of information. I mean, literally anything that the system does is going to send you a Syslog message for. So I recommend that you probably at least select it to minor issues or normal if you want to be able to follow, different pieces of information like, someone logged in successfully, or, things that aren't like an issue you've got to deal with. If you want to have that information and you want to store that in Syslog, normal will give you that type of information. Pretty much anything at that level and above it, it will actually be able to send it. So, just to recap on Syslog, 0 level, which is the highest, is emergency. Everything down to, in this case, normal, which would be informational, would all be included as part of Syslog. And then debug is, severity 7, which means you're getting everything. So that's the different levels that you have here. If you find that you're getting too much information, you can simply just change it to something that's a little bit more appropriate for what you're trying to monitor. You also need to be able to provide a Syslog server that you're going to send this information to. So here you'll put in an IP address of a device somewhere in your network that is going to be able to receive Syslog information. So you put the IP address there. You can also select if you want it to be sent via UDP or TCP. So you have that as an option. Typically UDP is used for Syslog, but TCP can be used if you've got a situation where you want to ensure that nothing is dropped, that there's no potential that the actual message doesn't get through to the Syslog server. You also have the port number, which this is the default port number for Syslog, and you've got the choice to be able to select whether or not you want the message to be in plain text or if you want it to be in XML. So what's the difference between these two? Well, in plain text, you're getting, basically just a Syslog message. So when we saw before in the slides, you noticed the Syslog message. That's pretty much what you would see. If you're going to be looking at it with, have human beings actually looking through it and looking through the logs themselves, having it in plain text is very handy. However, if you want to actually create some tools or you want to import this into another system, having it in XML can be very valuable because then that way you can key off of certain fields and things like that. So it just depends on how you're going to utilize the Syslog information. In addition to a primary Syslog server, you can also have a secondary Syslog server. So here would be a backup server in the event that the first one went down. So again, same characteristics here. Once you've configured this, you click Save, and now Syslog is configured on the system.